Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us today for our Agile and Nonprofits channel. We are so excited. Our team at Agile and Nonprofits, well, you hear us talk about Scrum all the time, one of the Agile frameworks. And so it's a real honor today to have the Scrum Inc. CEO, JJ Sutherland, with us today. And JJ has an extensive background in nonprofits. And I'm going to let you tell about that yourself, if you don't mind, JJ. So, I mean, like I said, so honored because our work is about helping nonprofits understand Agile and Scrum. And so tell us, why do you think nonprofits care about Scrum?
Well, thank you for inviting me, Diane. I'm really happy. I do care a lot about nonprofits. I worked for most of my career in nonprofits. I was in public radio for about 20 years. So I'm very familiar with the nonprofit work. And I think that it's so important for nonprofits because what Agile and Scrum are about are doing more with less, getting more stuff out the door, getting more projects done, helping more people. And that is something that I think nonprofits, almost more than anyone else, should take advantage of because there are always limited resources. There are always limited budgets and limited time and limited numbers of people. So take advantage of the people and time and budget that you do have in the most efficient way possible. And that's what Scrum does.
Oh, wonderful. I totally agree. We like to say, I know what the line actually is, right? In the book that you authored with your father, The Art of Doing Twice the Work in Half the Time. But we don't like to talk about work in nonprofits. We like to talk about impact, right? So we like to say creating twice the impact in half the time. Exactly. And so one of the things when we teach the Scrum framework to nonprofits, well, we end up having to translate a bit. Folks want to make sure that the framework makes sense in their setting, which is why we originally partnered with the Scrum Inc. team to launch that first Scrum Masters for Nonprofits course. And so one of the, I think, most important slides that we teach, and your colleague Avi Schneier does a great job explaining it, but the rule book, the Scrum framework, and then the playbook. What does it look like in your organization, right? How do you make it your own? So when nonprofits think about the Scrum framework and how to make it their own, make it fit for them and their board and their staff, what advice would you have for them to consider in their own playbook?
The first thing is, how do you define value? Because in a for-profit setting, like at a startup or something, it's really easy to count dollars and cents, right? You're making money, you're counting that. But that isn't what nonprofits are for. That's not why nonprofits exist. And so no matter what is, my mother, who was a Unitarian minister before she retired, and she did Scrum in her church, she said it was almost a spiritual obligation to get more people into the church, because if you can, shouldn't you? And so she had one of the things, the metrics is, attendance on Sundays and surveys and, what is the impact that they're having in their community. So figure out how you measure that, because one thing that nonprofits don't do a lot is measure things, measure the impacts. Some of the really successful ones do, like Medicine Sans Frontières, which is a nonprofit I feel very strongly about and have supported for years. They do a lot of metrics, like how many surgeries they've done, how many doctors, how many, a lot, and they really measure it so that way they can get better. Because you don't measure, you can't improve or know that you've improved.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all about that M, the measurable, and the SMART objectives, right? Talk about it, share it, make empirical decisions. Absolutely agree. And so, one of the things we love to talk about your field book in our Agile and Nonprofits book club. And there's such great case studies within that book and also the red book, both of them. And when we think about what it looks like in nonprofits, you just mentioned an organization you work with that you think does a great job of measuring and focusing on data. Do you have a story, like a case study of your own that's a nonprofit that you think's been very agile minded, implemented the framework, maybe with your involvement or not, but a story that you'd like to share about a nonprofit?
Sure, and I write about this a bit in the first book, Twice the Work in Half the Time. There's the Grameen Foundation in Uganda. So they are trying to help rural Ugandan farmers. I mean, this is very, very poor income. And what they did is they said, what was happening with these farmers is that two main things were happening. One was the middlemen were taking them to the bank, just really, charging, paying the farmer very little and charging a lot. So they made an app that everyone has a smartphone that let the farmers know what the market price was in the nearest market town. And just that knowledge. And they did it with about 6 Scrum teams. And then another one of their teams was focusing on crop disease, because of course they can't afford, the expensive treatments that we do, but there are natural ways to do it. There are things you can do if you intervene early. And so they, not only did they have it, but you could take a picture of it with your phone and then send it to the experts at the Green Mean Foundation, the Capitol, and then they could give you advice, live advice. Okay, this is what you can do with just natural stuff that you have around. And so I talked to the leader of those 6 teams, and he said what had happened was, it used to be every Monday morning they'd have like a 3-hour meeting, and things were slow, and people would point fingers and why this doesn't happen and all this other, just one of those horrible update meetings we've all been in. And at the end of the meeting, you're just depressed and angry. And he says, now, if I want an update, he just walks around the office and he can see where everything is up on the Scrum boards. And he sees, oh, that story has been stuck in doing for a few days. Hey, can I help you? Can I, it looks like you're stuck. And he doesn't have to wait for things to get really bad. He can go out and see, because making everything visible, he can see the state of the work. And that has allowed them to help more and more farmers.
Oh, that's fantastic. One of our other case studies was talking about a nonprofit that started using Scrum, Nuboco, and they're one of the ones that uses kind of like those Z racks, the clothing racks in the stores, and it puts the whiteboard on it and like ties it together as a fast way to have rolling boards all throughout their office, right?
That's awesome.
Yeah, so the more you make work visible, absolutely, being able to see what's there. Well, so one of the things when we think about implementing and making work visible, I've heard you say, and I've read you, that you've said this before, but I've heard you say it countless times, like, just get started. It's not about being perfect, it's progress, get started. So if nonprofits are going to take that advice to heart, just get started. What do you think? Where could they start? Where is there like a low barrier to entry, or is there a special spot in the framework where they could enter? What does that mean for them?
Right. You need to start with backlog. What is it that you need to do? And what does it mean for it to be done? So look at everything you're doing, and I mean everything, not just your special project on this, because what you want to do is get everything you're doing visible. Then you can prioritize it. And you can also see where you are spending your effort. One nonprofit I've been working with recently, one of the leaders there, he said, we obviously we don't do dollars and cents, but they do effort. Says effort is our currency. And where is that currency being spent? Because I'm sure a lot of your day is spent up with stuff that is not delivering the value and mission of your organization. So you want to measure it. You want to know where it is. And they say, wow, I'm spending 70% of my time doing, this busy work, which has no impact on the people I'm trying to help. How about we drive that 70% down? But if you don't put everything, everything. If it takes more than 15 minutes, put it in the backlog. That's just a rule of thumb, but you want everything, because that way, all that busy work, you can see, wow, there's so much waste. Or more, and this happens all the time, multiple people are doing the same thing and they don't even know it. So you have this duplicative work, and it's just waste. And one of the things you have to do as a nonprofit, you have an obligation to do, is get the waste out of your system so you can deliver value. We often talk about nonprofits. Okay, what percentage of donations are used for overhead, right? That's one of the big metrics I know. I've worked in nonprofits. You want to keep that number down. That's the responsibility, because people are giving you money to do good work, is to drive that overhead cost down as much as you can, so more of the budget goes to actually helping people. So do it with Scrum. That'll make it visible, and you can drive that number down.
That's a very good connection, right? A lot of our work, on the other part of our work, is on grants, and you're being judged often on what is that percentage. And so you're right, use Scrum to drive it down. You probably are going to increase your competitiveness too, right? So that's great.
Absolutely.
So when we think about, we've mentioned some different case studies, things you've written about, things you've seen in the field. And when we look at what these case studies are showing us, what we've seen in some of the formally published ones, some of the informal conversations we're having, is that there's always someone that's spearheading this idea, but it's not always the top of the org chart for the nonprofit. We're seeing a campaign consultant come in. We're seeing that it's a vice president of programs. I mean, it's really popping up throughout the organization, which to me, then I'm like, okay, so you're an Agile leader, but what's your definition of an Agile leader? If a nonprofit professional, regardless of what their org chart says, if they want to be an Agile leader, what do you think that should mean to them?
Well, I think that there are multiple kinds of leadership. There's sort of like the, okay, I'm the one in charge. This is what we need to do, right? The CEO kind of, traditional CEO. And I'm saying command and control. They could be a great CEO, but often CEOs are really busy and they don't have the time, and they're out raising money. That's really what a CEO of a nonprofit's job is: raise money. I've worked with CEOs of nonprofits. Yeah. I know that that's their job. So, but there's also leadership through influence. And I think in nonprofits that it happens in every organization, but I think in nonprofits it's even more so. You want to build a coalition of the willing. And the way to do that, the way to begin, is find one thing. One thing's got some visibility, and you can get a dedicated team to it, and then drive and demonstrate the performance, because nothing speaks louder than success. So if you have just one area that you can control, you want to make sure it's end to end, like one project or something that you can get people 100% dedicated to, or at least as much as you can, and then do it with them. And then everyone's going to start looking at your team going, I want to be like that. Mm. That's the way I want to be. Like demonstrating success, you'll increase your ability to lead through influence.
That's fantastic. I love it. And I think that, as I said, when nonprofits look to Agile and Scrum, there's a lot of questions. Does this apply to us? Right? We don't, as a nonprofit community, want to be explained to or told what to do from the for-profit sector. There's a pushback on that. But I think the case studies show that while a lot of the work has been proven and tested in the for-profits, I mean, your mom's example is a great one to show. Scrum framework has been in the nonprofit space for years. And it's about highlighting the story, giving some examples, helping nonprofits to see themselves in the framework. So, open-ended question. If a nonprofit, if you were to think about what's the most important advice that you could give them, some big closing thought, something that's going to help inspire them, what would it be?
Scrum, I mean, listen, no one's a special snowflake. And I hear this in for-profits, nonprofits, government, foreign countries, America, I mean, all over. And everyone's like, well, it has to be just in my context. And I got to tell you, maybe there is something out there that can't be Scrum. I've never run into it. And I work in a lot of different industries. But I think what the thing is what nonprofits need to do is demonstrate leadership. Nonprofits have a bad reputation in the for-profit world as slow, bureaucratic, not efficient. Is it the right way to actually give money? Can we do civil or civic work in another way? Because nonprofits do have bad reputations for not being fast and lean. And I don't think that's a fair reputation, but it is there. And I think that nonprofits have the obligation to change it. Mm. And you can do it by embracing Agile ways of working. It really has that much power. And I think that you owe it to the world of nonprofits at large to improve that. Because, I mean, we always hear the government, various politicians of any party talk about the waste in nonprofits. That should be something that isn't happening. Nonprofits should be admired. They do so much good with so little, so well. That's what the nonprofit sector needs to do.
Yeah, great advice, great context. JJ, thank you so much for taking time to be with us and to give your perspective to the nonprofit community. I think it's really going to help everyone embrace and think more about how they can use Agile and Scrum in their own organization. So thank you.
Thank you, Diane.